Hey everyone, welcome back. Thanks for joining on another Pushing Film live stream. How's it going today? Thanks for joining me. It's like been I think about a year now since I've been doing these live streams fairly consistently, so it's really becoming one of my favorite parts about doing this channel. But yeah, today we're going to talk about Fuji Acros, about the 35mm film, the Fujifilm Acros 2, the latest version, which from what I know is not too different to the previous version, and comparing that to the Fujifilm Simulation that comes on a lot of their cameras, including the X-Pro series, which I recently did a video on, and the Fujifilm X-T3 and so on. So if you've seen that video I did on the X-Pro3, I've linked it in the description of this video. It was about the X-Pro3 from a film photographer's perspective. So for me, someone who shoots a lot of film, I borrowed the Fujifilm X-Pro3 from Fujifilm Australia, which was great. And I just shot it in a way that I compared it to the experience of shooting film. And of course, they're completely different things when it comes down to it. But a lot of people are interested in this sort of stuff, and especially comparing some of those simulations. So I thought I would do a comparison. I mentioned in that video that I would do some live streams where I would go a little bit more in depth into some of the simulations. And here we are. So keeping in mind, however, that my side-by-side tests, all the images I've got here on Lightroom, they're not perfectly clinical tests of the film compared to the digital, because there's a lot of variables involved. For example, when it comes to the way you develop the film, whether it's Rodinol or HC110, all that sort of stuff makes a big difference. And even if you were to use the same settings on the digital camera compared to the film camera, there's always too many variables to consider. And the fact that the lenses are different, the way film reacts to light, all this sort of stuff. So just keep that in mind as we go into this. It's not meant to be scientific or completely clinical, but it's just meant to give you an idea if you are curious about how the two compare. If you're, for example, wanting to look into, is it worth using the simulations on Fujifilm cameras, for example, or maybe you shoot Fujifilm digital and you want to know how the actual film compares. So it's just really for fun, just for comparison, and just to give you guys an idea of how my side-by-side shots compared. So let's get straight into it and show you the images I've got here. You might have seen some of these in the Fujifilm X-Pro3 video that I did already, but I've got a few more that I didn't get time to show in that video because it would have just gotten too long. So here we are back in Lightroom, and I'm just going to move this a little bit. So just looking at the live chat here, I've got Mike J. Good evening. Hey, thanks for joining. Casa de Criso. Good, very early morning for you. I guess it's pretty early. One question comes to mind directly. Is the sim based on Acros 1 or 2? And how do the two films compare, given that the 2 is no longer made by Fuji? That's a good question. And the answer would probably be that they based it on the first Acros, because the Acros simulation came out a long time before Acros 2. And in terms of how the two films compare, I think they're pretty much the same. I've seen other YouTube guys do comparisons, and from what I can tell, there's only very minor differences. And again, those little variables in development and such probably make more of a difference. But yeah, I think the recipe, the formula for the actual film emulsion is the same, so there shouldn't be really too much difference in that regard. The size up. I expect clinical science. All right, cool. Here we go. So here are the images we've got. And the first ones I shot when I loaded this roll were just in this sort of park here where there was just a bench in the park. But one thing I'll note from the beginning, just so you guys know, is that the ones with the green highlight that you see there, they're the digital shots, and the ones with the blue are the film shots. You can kind of tell because the ones with the blue might have a bit more of the border showing. So for example, because I scanned it at home, you can see that film border. But yeah, straight away, here's a comparison. You've got the digital shot on the left and the film on the right. And just looking at them from far away like this, you can't see a huge difference. Maybe, if anything, my attention goes to the highlights here. Keep in mind, these clouds in the background were moving, so they were in slightly different positions. But the highlights on the digital shot on the left are a little bit more blown out. or maybe they're blown out in a way that doesn't look so good. Keep in mind that was shot on JPEG as well, because at the time I was trying to compare the straight out of camera JPEGs. And the other thing you'll notice straight away is that the digital shot is a lot sharper. Okay, so big difference there in terms of the sharpness. But the overall sort of tonality and contrast, not a big difference. If anything, the shadows look darker on the digital. So the contrast might be a little bit higher on the digital shot, but then it's sort of, it depends on how you look at it. Maybe the micro contrast is what's actually stronger. But overall, the tonality is pretty nice. It's a bit similar. What I find also is that any of the green tones, so like the leaves and grass, looks a bit brighter on the film shot. So I tried to use the same settings, use the same focal length equivalent. So on the X-Pro3, it was the 23mm lens, which is equivalent to 35mm. And that was the f2 lens on the Fujifilm X-Pro3. And on the Leica MA, which I used to shoot the roll of Acros 2, I used a 35mm lens. It was the Zeiss Bygone 35-2.8, which is a very sharp lens, mind you. But still, you can see the big difference there in terms of sharpness and resolution. Sure, these were scanned at home, and if you did something like a drum scan, you might get a bit more sharpness and resolution, but still, the digital shot definitely has that edge, if you prefer more sharpness. With the next one, I don't think my exposures were exactly equal, so I might have messed something up there. But looking at this one, again, you can see a bit more of that trend with the digital shot having a bit more contrast, or maybe it's just a little bit darker exposure-wise. This is one of those things where it could have come down to the development or other variables, but again, with the trees, you can almost see how much brighter the leaves look in comparison to this. Even if we were to boost the exposure on this one on the left, you can see the film shot has a slightly different look there. It just has a brighter look to the highlights. But again, the digital shot on the left is much sharper, a lot more detail. Because I shot the in-camera JPEGs on the X-Pro3, I think I chose the option to have the in-camera grain turned on, just to kind of try and bring it a little bit closer. And I find that actually made it look a little bit more like film, like the Acros film. This one is quite a close comparison in terms of settings and composition. I managed to get them pretty close here. But yeah, just looking at this again, the whole conclusion I came to is that the Acros Sim on Fujifilm cameras, and I'm not sure if it varies between the different models, it works great. It's a nice simulation. It's not too different than their built-in monochrome simulation, which is just called monochrome. But in reality, this is a straight out of camera JPEG on the left, and it has a great look to it. If you like shooting black and white, you have one of these cameras, you really would be pretty hard pressed to tell the difference, as I mentioned in the X-Pro3 video. So, you know, you can kind of just look at this and say, all right, that gives me an idea. This image here is very indicative of what I had found across the board with all these photos in terms of the comparison. Digital sharper. Again, there might be a little bit more depth of field because of the APS-C sensor, but there's a big difference in this one. I might have maybe misfocused the film shot slightly, or it could just be that in comparison it looks softer. But yeah, the grain is different, even with the built-in grain simulation on the X-Pro3. So, I've got Jen in the live chat. I recently bought some Acros, haven't used it yet. It's nice to see what to expect. Yeah, it's a nice film. I never shot a whole lot of it when it was around as Acros 1, but when I did, I actually used to push it to 400. And here's another shot where you can actually see that the film shot now has the maybe the edge in terms of contrast. So it's really hard to tell because there's not a huge difference. I think it's more of a difference in the way that the colors render in terms of their black and white output. So the wall here versus the wall there might indicate a different sensitivity that the film has to the color blue or whatever this wall was. I think it might have been red. So I guess if you played around with some of those Acros modes that the cameras have, like Acros plus yellow filter, Acros plus red, and so on, you would get a lot of different results too. But again, this is just meant to be a general, you know, look at some of the differences. And I think this sort of comparison might get a little bit more interesting when I do some of the color films. But I thought I'd start with Acros because I had a lot of shots here that were completely side-by-side results. And because I found Acros to be the closest to the real thing, obviously because it's a lot easier to match black and white than it is color. Yeah, so this is the same scene here. Obviously the guy had just walked up a lot further. Film on the right. You can see the amount of shadow detail is probably a bit better in the digital shot here, but I think the highlights hold up more nicely on the film shot. And when you're shooting digital, you have to sort of protect the highlights, which might have been maybe at the time, I'm not sure if I shot the digital a little bit darker to protect the highlights from blowing out. That might have been a little bit of a trend there, which you don't have to really worry about as much on film. Same deal here. The film just seems to have a brighter look across the board. Hey, Albert. Got Albert in the comments. Romy Galetto. Hello, everyone. Hey, Romy. Thanks for joining. And Gajan. Finally caught onto your live streams. Do you use soft grain or hard grain for the simulations? I think I used the soft. It was large and weak, I think, was what the settings were in the camera, but I might be wrong now because I was only borrowing the camera. I can't check, but from memory I think it was the weak and large simulation. When I used the strong option in the Fujifilm cameras, it looked a little bit too rough and unusual, so that was my finding with that. Trumpet Griffin, maybe shot to the most similar histograms would be a most like for like comparison. Yeah, so when you look at the histogram, that'll be a good way to compare even between shots here. So out of curiosity that you mentioned that, you guys probably won't see it because where I've placed my head in the live stream, you can't see that, but maybe I'll turn that off. So you can see the histogram there and the histogram there on the film shot. It's quite different. So yeah, I'm not really sure how to translate that, but that is an interesting thing that could be worth looking into later on. And we've got another comment saying, older Fujis don't come with Acros yet, but I'm quite happy with the monochrome sims too. Yeah, so in honesty, I compared the two. There wasn't a huge difference. I think there just seemed to be a difference in shadow detail mainly and contrast between the monochrome mode and the Acros mode. But I preferred the Acros mode a little bit myself. And another one saying, thank you for this detailed comparison, most detailed comparison for Acros film and real film. Yeah, I found another few videos out there. One of them I watched a long time ago, which was by Ted Vieira, who I'm a big fan of in terms of his podcast especially. But this shot here, it's quite a big difference in terms of contrast. And again, there's so many variables. Maybe it was the way this film was developed. I've seen some people's comparisons show that the digital always had more contrast, whereas in my examples, it kind of depends. Maybe it was the way it was scanned, maybe the way Negative Lab Pro interpreted the film. Could be the fact that I used X-Tol, and if anyone's curious, I used X-Tol at stock ratio to develop this film. So just looking at another couple of shots here. Again, that brighter look on the film shot on the right. Much softer looking result on the left with the digital shot, even though the settings were probably the same. And another live chat comment saying, I wonder if some of the highlight shifts are artifacts of the scanning process. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. There's so many variables. If you could probably scan this exact same frame of film on the right and it would come out even flatter than this digital shot on the left if you wanted it to, which is why I sort of wanted to make that disclaimer in the beginning. But we can look at maybe other things like the sharpness, which is the main thing you're going to notice really, is that the digital is obviously just going to be sharper all the time, more resolution. If you look at that information there with the background stuff like the car, the road, huge difference. And with the film, the highlights have a bit of a halation sometimes, which is because there's less resolution there. There's more softness, so it looks like a bit of a blob rather than like a defined wall on the digital shot when something's in the distance like that. In terms of shadow detail, they're both pretty good. The digital probably still has a slight edge here. And again, this could be the scan, but yeah, there's definitely a much softer look to the film. Another indoor shot here. But when you look at these without zooming in, there's not a huge difference. So yeah, it's a nice simulation. And Trumpet Griffin saying, observation simulation seems like deeper blacks. Yeah, I have noticed that myself as well. And I think in other people's videos, there was one by DP Review. That one was another good one worth watching. And I think I mentioned Ted Vieira. Shoots with Coops did one as well from over in Perth. So he has an old video. I'm not the first one to do this by any means. I just thought I would add my findings to the conversation. This one's a cool comparison, but the focal length here might have been a little bit different, or maybe I stepped back with one of the shots. You got the digital on the left, the film shot on the right. When you shoot a really high contrast scene like this and you kind of meter for the highlights, you let those shadows go dark, you can get a very similar look. So if you like that, it almost looks like pushed across, but it wasn't. This was shot at 100. I simply metered, for a darker image to let the shadows go dark. And it looks pretty similar. The shadows in the digital shot here have a little bit more, not so much detail, but the shadows are softer. So there's a bit less contrast in the shadow areas, I guess. But you can still make out the road and the curb in the film shot here as well. Sharpness is obviously a lot better in the digital shot. Look at that panel on the wall. But yeah, it's a hard one to compare. And this one's not actually the same shot for shot, but it's the same scene. I shot one on the digital on the left, film on the right again. And with this one here, the composition was a little bit different. And I think the exposure on the digital shot looks darker. Or this actually looks to be a raw file. So with this one, I applied the Acros Simulation in post. But if we look at the original shot, we could put it on Astia to give you an idea of what the original shot, what the scene looked like. So it was a contrasty scene. I exposed to get, the correct meter reading. And I think I copied those settings across to the film shot, but it looks quite different in comparison. So if you go into camera matching in your Lightroom profile browser, you can see that they have Acros regular, green filter, red filter, which brings your blues way down. Yellow filter, which adds a little bit more contrast. It should really. It seems to do the opposite here. Depends on the scene though. And then the normal monochrome. So just comparing, see Acros, monochrome, you can hardly tell the difference. Monochrome just opens up the shadows a little bit. So that's interesting to see there. All right, and the last shot I've got, I believe it's the last shot, just another street scene with high contrast. You can see my own shadow there in the shot. So yeah, that's pretty much it, guys. I just wanted to sort of take you through more of those examples of Acros that I had. And feel free to ask me any questions or anything, any particular things that you wanted to know about any of these shots. One thing I was showing in the X-Pro3 video was just talking a little bit more about that grain simulation. I used this shot as an example because these came really close. I set the cameras up on a tripod here so that they were in the same position. Tried to use the same equivalent focal length again, so 50mm equivalent. Similar f-stop equivalents, so maybe f2 on film on full frame might have been about f1.4 on the digital camera because it's a crop sensor. I tried to get them pretty close using just sort of a bit of a guesstimation there, and I turned on the grain simulation in camera using the weak large combination, I believe, and you can see it adds a nice bit of grain, gives it that filmic look. But the grain on the film shot is more noticeable. It's a lot more organic. And Acros is such a fine-grained film that it's really hard to kind of to see it in the first place. But yeah, there's more grain in the shadows on the film shot especially. And yeah, just checking some of the live chat. Awesome, thanks for taking the time. No worries. Yeah, thanks for watching and for joining on this one. Trumpet Griffin, good sim comparison. Love Acros. I made a sim for my Nikon Digital. Yeah. So again, I didn't shoot a whole lot of this film, but when I did, I quite enjoyed it. If anything, I shot the most Acros I have when I was in Japan because it was so cheap to buy there. It's incredible how much more it costs now with the new version, with version 2. When I've been to Japan a few times. Whenever I was there, you'd go to, Big Camera or Yodobashi. You could get these in 3 packs, and it was about, I think, less than $20 equivalent, 20 Australian dollars. So that'll be like 15 US dollars. Imagine that, $5 a roll in a 3 pack for the original Acros one. So I would buy it while I was over there, use it, push it to 400 if I wanted to, bring it back and develop it. And then eventually they discontinued that, bought out Acros 2, but the price that I mentioned earlier would probably only get you 1 roll. So 1 roll is, I think, 18, 20 Australian dollars, which is crazy. And of course, when you were buying Acros 1 locally, it was more expensive than Japan. It was about $12 or something, $10, $12, but still, it's almost double the price of what the original one used to be. But I think that's a necessary evil, like it was either that or the film was going to be extinct. So I'm glad that they still brought the film back, even if it's been outsourced to Ilford or whoever's making it, using the same exact recipe. I'm glad that it's still available. And I'm really lucky in that Fujifilm Australia actually sent me these rolls to test out for my, my own purposes. There was no expectation or anything required. They even sent me some 120 rolls of Acros 2. So I haven't tried that yet. Sorry guys, this happened last time. My camera seems to drop out a little bit, but I'm just gonna reconnect that. Yep, all right guys, sorry about that. And just checking some more of the comments I might have missed. Acros 1 here was 650 Canadian for a roll, and Acros 2 is 15 a roll, yeah. So there you go. It's a high price, but I suppose it's better than nothing, and it's probably because it maybe cost them more to make it. There was that issue with the chemical, or I can't remember the original reason. It was because some of the materials required became hard to acquire. So yeah, guys, that's it. Thanks for watching this live stream, and if you're watching it post-stream, appreciate you joining. I try and do these live streams every week, so make sure you check back if you want to see some more stuff I'm doing. I'll be probably doing another book sharing live stream soon. And I will be doing a live stream about the scanning guide that I did recently, because I had done the video the other day about my guide to scanning at home, and I said I would do a live stream with a Q&A while I actually took some film scans into Negative Lab Pro and converted them. So yeah, stay tuned for that one if you're interested. Thanks again for joining, and I'll see you on the next one.